Good evening. Good evening and welcome to the Center for Jewish History. My name is Annie Polland. I'm the Executive Director of the American Jewish Historical Society, which is one of the 5 partners that shares this space. And together, the partners have over 100 million documents and artifacts that tell the story, I should say rather, the stories of the Jewish people. Tonight, we're going to talk about a specific chapter in the story of the Jewish people, a specific theme, and that is of Gilda Radner, in the broader theme of Jewish women comedians. I know we don't have time to go on a tour of the archives, and I know you did not come here tonight for a tour of the archives. But I'm just going to show you a few things so you get a sense of how showing this film in this site, in this place, as part of the Jewish story makes sense. So these are the stacks. They're not that funny. They don't seem that funny. But inside are stories of people like Sophie Tucker, Joan Rivers, and we're going to be doing a program devoted to Joan Rivers on October 3rd, and I hope you can come. Judy Gold will be there to help enlighten us on the legacy of Joan Rivers. And Molly Picon. We have the papers of Molly Picon, and just the other day I held in my hands a little notebook that just looked like any notebook from the 1960s and 1970s, and inside of it were the notes she wrote when she was playing Yenta in the film Fiddler on the Roof. So it was just amazing, this beautiful handwriting, kind of the notes she wrote to herself, and it's touching things like that that make the history come alive. And I think that's the role of the American Jewish Historical Society and the Center for Jewish History more broadly, to make these stories, to make these chapters come alive for new generations. And so one last thing, a last plug, is that Emma Lazarus was not a comedian, but she gave voice to some of the most important words in American Jewish history, and I would say in American history, period. We have her papers here as well. And next week, next Wednesday, we'll be having a panel with the biographer of Emma Lazarus and a bunch of respondents to discuss Emma's legacy and the way in which the poem Give Me Your Tired, Your Poor, the new Colossus, has started to make waves in the news in the last year and a half. So there will be a conversation here, less than a week. We invite you to come. And because it's the poem's 135th birthday, we'll also be serving birthday cake. So please join us for that. I want to thank you all for coming. There's a couple more people I want to thank, in particular Martin Wendell from Magnolia Pictures, who's seated over here, and Tess Ornstein, who is also from Magnolia Pictures. And I also want to thank the evening's co-sponsors, Dan Friedman, the executive director of The Forward, who is after the film going to interview Lisa DePolito, the film's producer and director. And I also want to thank and invite up here for a bit Judith Rosenbaum, who's the executive director of the Jewish Women's Archive, a group that we love to partner with because we share the same, I think, ambition to tell these stories and make these stories spread beyond the archives. So I'm going to introduce Judith and bring her up, and then we'll go right into the film. But then after the film, stay seated, and we'll have a little discussion with the director of the film, Lisa DePolito. So thank you all for coming.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Judith Rosenbaum, and as Annie said, I'm the Executive Director of the Jewish Women's Archive. We are a digital archive that is devoted to documenting and sharing Jewish women's stories and elevating Jewish women's voices. We are delighted to be a co-sponsor of this series on Jewish women in comedy. This is a topic that is really near and dear to our hearts. 11 years ago, we produced a documentary film called Making Trouble that featured the stories of Jewish women in comedy, including Gilda Radner and some of the other women whose photos you saw up here, Sophie Tucker, Molly Picon, Joan Rivers, and some others. And Gilda is just such a wonderful and hilarious example of Jewish women drawing on their otherness to cultivate resilience, to challenge social expectations, to seek love, to find healing. And you'll see all of that here tonight. I hope you will return here for other programs, and that you will also check out the Jewish Women's Archive online at jwa.org to learn more about Jewish women in comedy, or really in any field. And enjoy the film tonight. Thank you.
But I also want to make sure you stay, because we're going to have a conversation with Lisa and Dan. My sense is there probably is not a dry eye in the audience right now. And when I introduced this film, I spoke a little bit about how Gilda falls in this amazing trajectory of funny Jewish women comedians, from Sophie to Molly to Joan and Gilda. But on the other hand, there is something so unique about her that no one before her and no one since her has kind of taken that place. So here to talk more about that and to talk about the creation of the documentary is Dan Friedman, the executive editor at the Forward, the Jewish Daily Forward, and Lisa Dapolita, who directed this wonderful film. So please join me in welcoming them.
Good. So welcome to the talkback, the question and answer session, and welcome to Lisa, and another round of applause for an amazing film.
Oh, thank you.
So we're in a series called Not Just Funny Girl. It's about different Jewish women American comedians, not necessarily in that order, and yet we're very sad at the end of that film. It's a weepy. But Gilda Radner. So first of all, so why Gilda and why now?
Well, I do all the fundraising videos for Gilda's Club, which is a place on Houston Street that was founded by Gene Wilder and Gilda's friends after Gilda died from ovarian cancer, and it's a cancer support place. And there's 18 of them throughout the country. And Gilda's spirit lives on there. So many people have read her book. So I just thought her legacy is so unique, because she's obviously this groundbreaking, amazing comedian, but she's also really an inspiration for people in a deeper way.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. I mean, it's interesting that as you can hear from my accent, I'm a foreigner, and so I didn't really know about Gilda Radner as a comedian, but having been to Film Forum on a number of occasions, which is right next to Gilda's Club, I knew her as a champion of these things, and so had been inspired by that before seeing her comedy. So when you're making this film, hands up first of all in the audience, who knew Gilda Radner? Who used to watch her in the 70s? Yeah, so the people who are here, are big Gilda fans. They're not people who watched the film to find out who she was. But did you make it for people like this, for people like me, for 20 millennials? Who did you make it for?
I don't know if I made it for anybody particularly. I just really wanted to tell Gilda's story. Yeah. So, what's interesting is most of the audiences, we've been going to film festivals, and we open tomorrow in theaters. Most of the audience has been people who knew Gilda. But we've also gone to a few high schools and shown the film, and the girls loved her.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think she's, she is just, perhaps, why do you think they loved her? What is it they love about her?
I think she's a very, her spirit comes out. She's very feisty. I don't know the word. She's very
sassy.
Out there, sassy. She goes for it.
Yeah.
Yet there's something that I think people have always felt is that she's approachable. There's something about her that's identifiable, yet she's still this strong person.
Yeah. I think that's right, and I think that you kind of get that a little bit when the sort of the more recent or current SNL members are reading her diaries. That they're, they can identify with her. Doing the same show that she was doing. But tell us about those diaries. Like, where did they come from? How did you then get to the cast, and how did you choose who was going to read what? And
well, it was a work in progress. I did this film in pieces. So every time it would take a little while to even get Gilda's friends on board. So interviewing one person would lead to another person. And one of the biggest supporters of the film was Michael Radner, Gilda's brother and her friends and family who have supported the film. And finally, he gave me access to her boxes that were in storage since she passed away, that he didn't even know it was in there. So that was really the amazing thing. And then getting the modern day, we all call them the modern day comedians on board. We didn't know how they would read the material, or if they would read the material, because going through famous people who have agents, their agents would want them to have the lines in advance, and we didn't really want that. I didn't really want it rehearsed. So my Amy Poehler was our first interview, and my producer said, well, why don't you take out the journal and read to Amy? So I took out the journal, and Amy's like, oh my God, is that Gilda's journal? And she went for it, and it kind of happened organically.
And so when was that like? So how long have you been making the film, and when was the Amy Poehler interview? Because I guess once you've got Amy Poehler reading Gilda's journal, you're like, oh, I've got a movie here.
Yeah, that was pretty late in the process, though, because to me the film was always Gilda's film, and I wanted to put her film together. So we filmed Amy last year in January.
And as well as the modern day people, it really is Gilda's film. But it's very interesting that now we take it for granted that everyone's filming everything either the government's filming us all on closed circuit TV, or we're filming each other on iPhones. But obviously when Gilda Susan aged 4 months is that's quite a while ago, and so I assume that the one of the latest films is Gene Wilder actually walking around, and so you must have amassed like a large amount of like Super 8 film and stuff.
Oh yeah,
whatever
Super 8, 16 VHSs. Some of those no one had the original. They had the DVDs. Some of them we went. Yeah, a real mismatch of all kinds of stuff.
So where was that all in the boxes, or where did you get that from?
Some of them were in the boxes, but once we started seeing this stuff, we wanted really everything we can find on Gilda. So Gilda's friends went into their storage units. Not they didn't really want to, but they did, and we got some things from friends, some things from fans, some reporters who had interviewed Gilda 40 years ago still had their cassette tapes.
That's amazing. And the cassette tape you see at the beginning that I assume plays in and out as the background sound, like where did you get that from? Is that?
Well, the audio is made up of about 20 different sources. So there was an original box of tapes that Gilda had recorded for her book, and that's the tape that you see, but the sound on those tapes were really warped. So we had to supplement with all other kinds of tapes.
And as you were making it, so when did you first start making this?
About 4.5 years ago.
Right.
But I wasn't really, it was sort of a hobby, and it was sort of a film that I was going to give to Gilda's Club. And then once I got the archival material, it really became something bigger than I ever imagined.
Where was that question going? And what did you learn? So you'd worked for Gilda's Club before. You're going to make this film about her, but in the last 5 years, last 5 years, you must have learned so much about her. What's the thing that struck you? What are the things that struck you that you learned about her that you didn't really know 5 years ago?
Well, I mean, you can talk to friends and family, and if you ask somebody, what's Gilda like? They're like, she's funny. And you're like, okay, she's a comedian. And she was a really good person. That was the one thing that everybody came up. But listening to the tapes and reading her diaries, she really was funny. So even when she's writing about her eating disorder, or she's writing about cancer, and she's talking and she's really sad and she's really emotional, there's still a sense of humor in it, and there's a sense of hope. So I think what I learned is Gilda never hit rock bottom. She was always able to find the silver lining in the hope.
Yeah, no, I think that comes out, and you kind of make that point with the Gary Shandling thing and Alan Zweibel. I had cancer. What did you have? And that's it's kind of I guess that now also we used to shows that challenges on every level, and there's a level of everything is now acceptable. But what that was 79, 80.
87.
88. 89. Yeah. So that was pretty difficult. And so I think that because we end the things we know about her are that she's incredibly funny and a lovely person, and the film ends on the cancer, that those are the two things that we think about. But then, of course, going throughout the whole time is the eating disorder, and that leads to a lot of different things. So how did you, but you treated that very gently here, how did you decide how to portray that?
Well,
and how do you feel you did portray it?
yeah, I mean, nobody told me about Gilda's eating disorder, or if they did, it's in her book. It's always something. It's like one line in her book that she had every eating disorder. And her friends, I think Gilda made a joke of it, so no one really knew how serious it was. But I could find her journals, and so that was, to me, the inner voice of Gilda. And I wanted to do it subtly, because I thought that was part of just a small part of her story. But that's the challenge of a film, of putting a whole person's life into 84 minutes.
Right,
you know?
right. Yeah, no, I mean, she passed away at 42.
Yeah.
So that's 2 minutes per year. So and that's pretty tricky. One of the things that that really struck me was that pretty much every photograph that you have of her until the cancer comes on, and you have that big picture of the very whited out face. Pretty much every picture and every piece of footage of her until then, she's smiling, and I don't know. It struck me. Is there something? Tell me more about that. Was that a decision you made, or was it just like she was just always smiling?
I think she always smiled. I mean, she had a beautiful smile, and I think she's recognized as her smile. And I think that was sort of, if you watch SNL and you watch the 5 seasons in a row when I watched it, and season 4, Gilda is skinny. She is seriously so skinny that it's scary, but she's still smiling and she's happy, and I know that she's going through stuff. So I don't know, that was just who she was. I think she wanted to make people happy too.
And I think I think also doing live TV. I mean, it says in the show that that some people really feed off that. So she gets in front of the audience, and there's one thing doing it to a camera, and it's like it can be fun, but you're in front of an audience and people are there and they're with you. It's like, this is what I'm made for, and so you light up, you escape the rest of the worries that you have the whole time. And just one question, and maybe it's just because she didn't really have time to find herself in film, but like she never really did transfer that success from television onto film. And do you think it was a lack of audience there, or that she just didn't really have time to find who she was in film, or why do you think?
I think a couple things. I think she wanted to be with Gene. So the movies she picked were with him. I think there weren't the right parts for her, but also Gilda loved an audience. She loved being in the theater. She loved having a live audience. So that may not have been her medium, because she really wanted that interaction, and movies are so different than that.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting as well, just seeing the footage of the live show, that she didn't want to do that, and why? I mean, you presumably, because you've pared it down to like her very sharp statement about why she didn't want to do that. But why do you think that, because that has an audience, it was something she dreamed of doing, but why do you think that the live shows were not?
I think it was a lot of pressure it wasn't an ensemble, she was a star. She did get very bad reviews. And so even though the audience loved her and they extended the show, I think there was a lot of pressure, and I think she fulfilled her dream, and I think it wasn't exactly what she wanted, but she still loved it too.
Yeah, great. So let's take some questions from the audience. I think we have there's a few people. There's a man back there. Shirley, there's a gentleman back there. Do you want to take the...
I have to say that probably the most striking thing to me about the film, given what I see on the wall behind you and the series in which this film appears, is that literally the only reference to Judaism or anything Jewish was Alan Zweibel happening to mention he was married in a temple. So I'm just curious if the message there is that Judaism really was irrelevant to Gilda Radner's life, or that it was decided that to sort of universalize the message of the movie for purposes of Gilda's Club?
Well, the film is based really on what Gilda talked about. So that wasn't anything in her audio tapes or in her diaries. She always identified with being a Jewish girl from Detroit. So that was important to her. She was raised by her nanny, who was actually Christian. So I'm not sure where her family wasn't religious. So that wasn't anything that was kind of part of the story.
And I think also at the end she's singing. What's she singing to the baby? Hava Nagila to the baby. So, having watched the film a few times, you catch a few things. One of the fun things is spotting the celebrities that you don't caption. So there's what is it? There's Alan Alda is there, and Paul Simon's there, and well, I guess the what's his name from former senator,
Yeah.
who Dan is Sammy's Romanian, yeah. Another question from the audience? I thought we had. No, this is unusual when you have an American audience to not have a lot of different questions about that. I must have covered everything in depth for you there. But so our last question. So so it starts. This opens in the theaters tomorrow. So you've got a sneak preview here tonight. And what do you hope that this does? I mean, do you hope this does something for Gilda's Club, for the memory of Gilda Radner, for eating disorders? What if you could say in a year's time this film has done one thing? What would it?
Well, I would like it to cement Gilda's place in comic history, because I think when I was trying to get funding for the film, there was a lot of, well, no one knows who Gilda Radner is anymore, and she really has a place in comedy, with Lucy and the great comedians before her and all the comedians that come after.
Right. Great. Oh, there is another question. Good. Not letting the country down.
Was there any material that, for any reason, for time or just it didn't fit in, that you wanted to include but had to leave out?
Yeah, I mean, the audio tapes were pretty amazing, the first set of audio tapes, and that were extremely damaged. And some of the stories were wonderful. So there was a story about, and also what's hard when you're doing a film where Gilda's narrating, you have no footage to go with it, so sometimes you just can't tell a story. But there was a story about Gilda at camp, and she wanted to be in plays. And she said that the pretty girls would be princesses, and the controlling girls would be next to the princesses, and then the fat girl, would be a servant. And she would talk about how she would cry in her cabin, but then she realized that she couldn't be pretty, but she could be funny. So that it was such a great story, but the sound was so bad, and that stayed in for a while, and then we just had to let that go.
Do we still make DVDs? Can you put that as an extra DVD?
I don't even know if anyone would understand it with subtitles.
With subtitles, that'd be good. Thanks. The other. So just. Come. Yes.
Yeah, I just had a question about the book because I haven't read it. I haven't read the book, and I have a question about it. Would you say? I mean, you said that the audio that's used as background, that she used that in the writing of the book. Do you think she also used these diaries as well?
No, because they were from different times. So the audio was the way she wrote her book. She recorded things when she was on her own, and then she sat with somebody who would prompt her with some questions, or she would just talk. Because that also goes back to how Gilda always needed an audience, and that's how she wrote her book. And she was also she was not well when she wrote her book. And she recorded an audio version of her book 3 weeks before she died. So she was really on a mission to write her book and have it come out. But the diaries were from different parts of her life.
Yeah. The other question that I had, which I wrote down, but couldn't read, was that as well as being American and a comedian, she's a woman, and you touch on that in the film, and of course Amy Poehler has talked about her particular debt to Gilda, but did you have a sense of how things have changed and how maybe Gilda helped change things?
Well, I think what's amazing about Gilda is that as a performer, she felt equal to the guys. She was never threatened by anybody on stage and always loved being with other people, and that's why guys like Belushi could perform with her. What Amy and the people that I interviewed said was watching Gilda, she was positive. There was something about her that was fearless, but it was also good-natured. And some of the other comedians who had come before weren't actually the Phyllis Dillers and the Joan Rivers were, Gilda was different than them.
Yeah, I think that's right. And there's a question there.
I heard Gene Wilder once on a radio interview talk about years after she died, and there was almost a kind of, no doubt that he loved her, but there was also a kind of anger that I heard in the interview about her insatiable need to be, reassured and insecurity. So I was wondering about that.
Yeah, so I tried to base everything on Gilda's point of view and what she talked about. So in these audio tapes that she had recorded a couple of years before she died, and in her diaries that she had written, she adored Gene. She loved him. So what I could say is that he was the love of her life. Whether she was the love of his life, I can't say. I read his book too. So he wrote a book, and it kind of tells you about the how he felt the relationship was. But I did spend a day with Gene about a year before he died, and he told me he couldn't live with her and he couldn't live without her. And that kind of, you don't know people's relationships, but that kind of summed it up. But I could see why Gilda loved him. There was something kind of really gentlemanly and whimsical and nice about him. But I can't, so I tried to stay on how, since Gilda's telling her story, how she felt about him.
And how long did she have the cancer before she actually passed away? It was quite
About 2.5 years.
Yeah. So that's the last 2.5 years that they were together, and that she was obviously going to be, unstable and needy in a totally understandable, not necessarily Gilda
I think
way.
actually it was the opposite. I think Gilda was very needy and insecure until she found cancer. And I think it changed her in a way, and it gave her her independence, and it gave her all the things I think she worried about before didn't really matter anymore.
Yeah, there's a new museum of comedy in Jamestown, New York. Do you know how they're including her, or how much they're including her into the museum?
Yeah, I all I know is that her friends Alan and Robin included, they gave some letters of Gilda, but I don't know apart from that. But she definitely deserves to be part of that museum. I know that's what we're actually talking about it, because they've been collecting estates from different they're just building. It was the Desi and Lucy Museum, and now it's supposed to be amazing.
Anyway, so on behalf of everyone here and
there's one more question. Well, Gilda went to the wellness community, which was in the film, on the West Coast. And then when she came to Connecticut, there wasn't anything for her. So it was her wish to have clubs on the East Coast, but I don't think she wanted them, she didn't want a Gilda's club, but she wanted places on the East Coast.
That's great. So on behalf of the AJHS and the JWA and the Four, we'd like to thank Lisa so much for coming here and for her film.
Thank you.
And join not Lisa, but the 3 other organizations on October the 3rd for Judy Gold and a discussion of Joan Rivers.